Okay, of all the questions that I've answered, and God knows I've done enough D500 to Nikon reviews and enough Fuji X-T2 reviews, the one question that I keep getting asked over and over and over again, even though I've gone over it seemingly infinitely, is, which one should I get, the Nikon D500 or the Fuji X-T2? And the question is, well, what sort of shooter are you? What is your main purpose or intent? Now, I've made very detailed lists with links and gone over specific point systems comparing the two. The Fuji X-T2 slightly edges out the Nikon D500, going over a list of 42 criteria. But that's over 42 criteria. Your spectrum of intent of use might be only a certain section of those 42 points. So then the question becomes, how do you even boil it down more simple? The best thing to do is actually make analogies. What is the Nikon D500 that distinguishes it from the Fuji X-T2? Look, I own two Nikon D500s. One's filming my ugly face right now. Another one's 1,000 miles away at my other house, and I got two Fuji X-T2s. One of them's with me over here. So, got two of each. Certainly heavily invested. Made lots of training videos on the D500. Lots of training videos on the Fuji X-T2. What's the key points to make a very simplex analogy of which camera is which? The D500, as it stands out, apart from the Fuji X-T2, without going over the lists, which I've already gone over in other videos, is that the D500, a lot of people don't understand nature analogies, okay? The Nikon D500 is that large-eyed hoot owl, the large-eyed owl. Only farmers or people that live out in the country would know this. They're kind of amazing birds, and they've always been mystical birds ever since ancient times. They could swoop in on something that no human could see. It's totally pitch black outside, but the owl can still see that. High ISO performance on the Nikon D500, incredible. Absolutely incredible. The buffer, there's nothing that's going to beat the XQD card that's in slot 1 on the Nikon D500. Nothing. I mean, the buffer is much more so than that of the Fuji X-T2. That's undeniable. Autofocus performance is excellent. If I were someone who's doing a lot of night work, club work, late night photography, indoor photography, late night street photography, the answer would be the Nikon D500. The same thing that makes the Nikon D500 so awesome is also the same thing that is one slight flaw in the Nikon D500. Just like large-eyed marsupials, and I used to have a sugar glider. That thing had huge, gigantic eyes. It's a nocturnal animal. When you bring it out in the bright daylight, it'd squeal because it's too much bright light. The Nikon D500 does clip specular highlights by 3/4 of a stop or stop faster than most other Nikon DSLRs, most other mirrorless and DSLRs. So that is something that you actually have to curb yourself from. Usually, like if you're shooting in a bright outdoor photography, a lot of people will actually set the exposure compensation by 1/2, 3/4 of a stop less, and then raise it as necessary so you don't actually clip the specular highlights. So those are the advantages of the Nikon D500. Night photography, indoor photography. The high ISO performance, the Fuji X-T2 doesn't even come within 1,000,000 miles of the Nikon D500 for high ISO performance. Just does not. Does not. Buffer. Fuji X-T2 does not come within 100 miles of the Nikon D500 and buffer performance. Fuji X-T2. A better camera for travel photography. Is the camera small and compact? Yes, but once you mount a lens on there, is it really any smaller than the Nikon D500? Yes. That much? No. X-T2 is going to have a longer longevity, all things being equal, than the Nikon D500 will. The customer support, the firmware upgrades, the camera is a dreamboat. Absolutely love, and I never say that. Really, I never say that. I don't. There's only a few cameras that I've actually ever said that I loved. Not literally loved. One of them's a Nikon D500, the other one's a Fuji X-T2. Amazingly enough, both of those came out in the same year, 2016. The other cameras I would consider that I loved would be a Nikon D3. Can't even say that I love the Nikon D810, which is the best camera for portraiture and for landscape photography. But I certainly can say that about the Nikon D500, the Fuji X-T2, also the Fuji X100T. There are other cameras that I love, but they're older film cameras, so they're obviously not very applicable for this video. So the serious differences between the Nikon D500 and the Fuji X-T2 are not all that radical. Going over a 42-point criteria in a list that I made, and I will post that list link below. You're able to see it, and I went over that list over and over again. The Fuji X-T2 edges out the Nikon D500, but the Nikon D500, has 60 plus years worth of lenses available that you can toss on it. But you can also toss with a $12 adapter those same lenses on the Fuji X-T2 and use focus peaking, including lots of other various mounts, and use various adapters for those, like M42 screw mount adapters for old Pentax lenses, and a lot of those Pentax lenses can't be mounted on the Nikon D500. So the serious differences between the Nikon D500 and the Fuji X-T2 are, what sort of shooter are you? Are you someone that's constantly shooting indoors or low light situations? The autofocus on both is incredible. The Nikon does have a lot more lenses available for it, but ultimately the Fuji X-T2, with an adapter, has more capabilities of more lenses than even the Nikon D500, since the Fuji X-T2 will take every Nikon lens out there, including basically every screw mount Pentax and Leica M mount lens, so that's the serious difference between the two. Need to know what sort of photographer you are. If you're a general photographer, someone saying, I just shoot everything, the answer would be the Fuji X-T2. There is no chance that the Fuji X-T2 can also step to the Nikon D500 for serious, hardcore, I said hardcore, expert/professional nature wildlife photography or sports photography, because it does not have the huge glass that the Nikon does. No 200 to 500, that crap does not exist with Fuji. Fuji's 100 to 400 millimeter lens, sorry Fuji, but that lens is a bit of a joke. It's not bad, but that lens is a bit of a joke. So, if you're a hardcore professional sports or action wildlife photographer, you're not asking me that question. Usually you're not. You already know the answer to it, so that huge glass does not exist for the Fuji, but it does for the Nikon. And that's the other key difference. That's really the last key difference. As a general camera, however, the Fuji X-T2 is definitely a better choice than the Nikon D500, with all those caveats in favor of the Nikon D500.